Hi guys, I've got a really cool wine to share with you today. Well, actually, it's champagne. And if you haven't heard of grower champagne or you're not sure what that is, then stay tuned because I'm going to explain exactly that. And I'm also going to tell you about Special Club, which is essentially its own ranking system for grower champagnes. So I've got a great grower champagne here. This is actually one of the top growers over in Champagne. This is produced by a guy called Arnaud Margain, and so the estate is called A. Margain, and this is a Special Club grower champagne. So over in Champagne, we have lots of different champagne houses, but we have what we call grower champagne. So if you're not familiar with what that is, I'm going to explain that right now. But basically all over the world, there's a lot of producers that will get grapes from multiple different vineyard sites. So essentially a lot of your big champagne houses over in France will be able to get grapes from multiple different growers. And then what they do is they produce the wine. Now that is great for maintaining house style, particularly your Moët, your Veuves. They all have a house style. They get that consistency year on year for a couple of different reasons. One, they blend. So generally you'll have a non-vintage. You're able to blend multiple different vintages together, which means that you can balance the consistency and make sure that stylistically you get that same house style that you want to produce. The other thing is being able to use different growers means that if there's a damaged site or one was more affected by, say, spring frost, then we can also look at different parcels and help to balance that consistency. Generally, most non-vintages will have a base wine and then they blend reserve wines. So how non-vintage works is essentially you've got what they call like a Solera system, which is how they make sherry. So you'll have multiple different barrels and you'll take little bits of wine out of those barrels every year. And once you do a new vintage, you'll add that to a barrel and then you'll top up the subsequent barrels. So as you're topping up and moving from barrel to barrel in that system, so let's say you've got your first row of barrels, you take say a third out and then you'll top that up with the blend above or the barrels in another row. And so that essentially means that you get a blend of multiple different years, which is why we call it a non-vintage. And in general, depending on how much base you have in the wine and who the producer is, you generally drink them on release or soon after, because some of those vintages are very, very old. So they're reserve wines, they're back vintages that are in that blend. So they've essentially already aged. So when we have a vintage champagne, it's usually, if it's from a great producer, it's usually an investment grade champagne because it can age. It's got low production volumes and they're generally much rarer and so only produced in the best years generally. And yeah, they have the capacity to age because they're from that vintage. They've done the mandatory or a little bit longer than the mandatory aging period, which they have over in Champagne, and that means that it has that built-age structure to keep aging. So yes, spring frosts and winter freeze, so being able to get multiple different grapes from multiple different vineyard sites to create that house style. Grower champagnes don't have that benefit. So grower champagnes are basically the person that is growing those grapes then goes on to produce that wine on their estate. So they generally have, or they're said to have, a greater reflection of terroir because they're from that individual site and that individual estate. So grower champagnes generally for that reason are very sought after for that reflection of terroir. They have that very small supply. So they're very much kind of got all the calling signs, if they're a good quality producer, of being essentially a Grand Cru, even if not by name. And that's where Special Club comes in. Unlike a lot of other appellations and regions, generally, if we go to say like Burgundy, for example, you'll have Burgundy as a region, you'll have the hierarchy where you have your village level wines and then individual appellations that sometimes then have your Grand Cru, Premier Cru sites. In Champagne, you have a single appellation, which is Champagne. Within that, you have sub-villages. And essentially, there are a lot of different cru sites. So you have 44 Premier Cru and you have 14 Grand Cru. So it's given that the entire appellation is essentially rated and highly regarded, sometimes it can be difficult to find a really great champagne, and that's where producer reputation comes in. Producers that have built up a reputation of producing some of the best champagne in the region. Now, grower champagne don't have that same Grand Cru ranking system, but they do have something else, and that is the highest tier that you can be sort of classified, or the most prestigious title that you can receive in the grower champagne category is Special Club. Now, after all of that, we finally get to this wine. So this is a Special Club 2015 champagne by Arnaud Margain, and so the estate is a Margain. So fantastic producer, beautifully boxed. I will take it out so you can have a look because it's got a beautiful bottle. 2015 was a great year in Champagne. As I said before, we have winter freeze and spring frost, so the two sort of main things that we're battling against, or producers are battling against, which can not only damage the entire vineyard site, and once vines get below a certain level in terms of temperature, the grapes can actually die. So it can completely wipe out some vintages. Spring frost as well can mean that we struggle to fully ripen that grape. Generally, in even warmer vintages or years, we still have quite a cool climate. Champagne is a cool continental climate. Basically what that means when you hear continental is it's inland, and cool is self-explanatory. So cool continental, which means that it's generally dry, but we do have a really good soil that is that sort of chalky limestone. We've also got a lot of marine fossils, which gives it that beautiful sort of minerality that we get. 2015 was a fantastic year. This is a vintage, so not a non-vintage, where we're blending multiple different vintages together. Sometimes you'll get non-vintages that have a significant base, which is that year's vintage, and then they blend it with reserve wines as well. So you do get additional complexity, but being a non-vintage, we've already had some of those wines that have been aged in barrel before they make it into the bottle. So in general, depending on the quantity of base and the producer, you would generally drink them on release or soon after, because of those grapes that have already had that long aging period. So 2015, this is a vintage wine. It's a really regarded producer. It does have that Special Club title or recognition, which means that it's essentially one of the best grower champagnes that you can get. It's a Blanc de Blanc, so essentially that means white from white. So usually with Champagne, we have three key varieties: Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and Blanc de Blanc means that we're making a white wine from white grapes only, so we're only using the Chardonnay. If we have a Blanc de Noir, we're only using the red grapes. Sometimes it'll be just Pinot Noir, sometimes it'll be a blend. But this one is Blanc de Blanc 2015 Grower Champagne, Special Club, top of the hierarchy, made by the grower. So you have that great reflection of terroir. You've got everything that you want in a beautiful, crisp champagne. Cheers.